thinking, I am not going to Snyder and I am not going to Swift. Because every one of their trucks get tow up apparently. You didn't see a Warner, you didn't see any other truck but a Snyder Swift. Snyder Swift. Every video, oh, safety. You know, you want to look and pay attention because of this reason. And boom, they show the picture and it'd be Snyder just tow up under a bridge. I mean, man, them videos too. When you used to cut meat, you know, the biggest thing you got to worry about is cutting your hand or losing a finger. When you see a truck smashed into a bridge, whoo, you be paying attention, man. I was memorizing them heights 13.6. Yes, sir, 13.6. Don't go to 13.6. Because, man, it would show you trucks with the roof tore off and they be all smashed into bits and bits. You just be sitting there going, this is a dangerous job. What the hell am I doing? I need to go get back into meat cutting because this is serious. But anyway, so I go into that. I'm deciding, okay, I'm into this, I'm doing that, and I'm listening to these recruiters. And that was probably another wake-up call. Like, the recruiters was the first time I started to get the truth. Because a lot of companies back then admitted that we're a year company. We're a 2-year company. You know, I remember Steven specifically came in there, told us, hey, you come with us for a year or 2 years. That's why you stay with us, you know. We're not going to be the highest paying company out there because you have no experience. I mean, they told us that to our face, okay? You know, there was, with those recruiters back then, again, this is back then, and especially at the school, they were trying to really get us to see, you know, it was that nod, wink, wink that we know you've been lied to. We know about that simulator, right? But this is not real life. And one of the reasons I ended up going to Warner was because when I was going through training, I would have such up and down days, and I'll talk about that later, but Warner was the first to do computer logs. And I know that's shocking to anybody in trucking now, but they were the first to do computer logs. And when they came in, I mean, they had the computer with them. They showed us what the Qualcomm was. I mean, it was very, very, very hands-on. And the guy let us play with the Qualcomm and everything. And we was like, damn. You know, this like, man, this is some seriously great stuff. You know, I'm impressed. And I was pretty impressed with their ability to just, you know, give us real knowledge. You know what I mean? Like giving us an idea of what is this, you know? Because like when you go through the recruiter, you get this idea that you're going to do 20 years, you're going to be a big time trucker, you're going to own all these trucks. And, you know, that's a bunch of bullshit. But when you go with the recruiters back then, from the companies that would come and speak every week, and that would, you know, go through driver placement, because the guy from driver placement would always be there monitoring what they said, because there's certain legal rules that they have. Like some of our teachers, our trainers, they actually own their own trucking companies, but they can't recruit us. I think that's actually against the law in Michigan. So, you know, and the driver placement, which is why you really should go to any company because they have driver placement. That guy was like pivotal because like he could look at a student and be like, oh, this guy's having difficulty. You need to go to Warner because Warner got, you know, they got computer logs and they can focus on your driving versus going to TMC or what was one of the other? I think we didn't have a Swift recruiter and we didn't have a Snyder recruiter. We had Stevens, Warner. And because you got to remember, Stevens and Warner back then were really trying to grow. They were trying to ramp up so they could see. People think of Warner today as being this big, gigantic company. Back then, Warner was not that big. Warner was not that big back then. I mean, some people, they were still new kid on the block, you know. And back then, I think C.L. Warner in 2004 might have still been running it, or one of his kids was probably running it back then. And, you know, it was way more hands-on, you know, way more, you know, you got the feeling that it was a beginning company, you know, starting up, trying to get bigger and bigger and bigger. Because it was all about, you know, investing in a company back then. Warner used to promote their company investments back then. That was huge. They would always try to tell people about the company investments. You got to remember back in 2004, 401ks and all that stuff wasn't that big, you know. And they were really starting to push that stuff back then. But anyway, so once we started getting the recruiters, that's when you start getting an idea of what the hell you involved in. Because like I said, the recruiters were coming in. I mean, Stevens, The guy's speech was just straight up. He was like, you know what? We don't. Our truck drivers don't stop at truck stops. They run as hard as possible. And I'm because at first I was like, they don't stop at truck stops. How they pee? Yes, but it's like, but he was basically giving us a spiel that they run really hard, and I was like, yep, definitely not going to your company because I don't need to be running really hard. But he also, talked about the benefits of doing refrigerated. He talked about the benefits of, learning the industry because you do learn a lot. I mean, Stevens does probably still do a lot of uh, uh, different types of hauling because they used to haul back then. They were hauling medicines for pharmacies. They were hauling food. They were hauling dry van stuff. You were doing teams. Like that's a lot of different stuff. And the thing about refrigerated too is you get a lot of knowledge when it comes to balancing loads and learning how the industry works. Now, the way you will be naive though is slow time because refrigerated really doesn't have slow time. I mean, hey, this is a fat, sick country, so if you're doing refrigerated, there's always freight, But they gave us a lot of knowledge about that. And that was really when I got the wake up call. Like, okay, I got to sacrifice a year, go with this company, be over the road. And that's the next part right there. Because when I was in class, oh man, some of the dudes in class and there was a mix. It was some black guys, some white guys, but most of these guys, like we had a guy who everything he told us was, his boys, hooked him up. His boys paying for this. His boys, they're gonna look out for him. His boys, his boys, everything. I mean, he was always chip chattering about how his boys and how him and his boys was gonna do this, and him and his boys are gonna do that, and him and his boys are gonna do this. And he was just everything, he knew everything, And then him and another guy who was Middle Eastern, which was hilarious because he kept telling the recruiters that he knew how to drive. He said, "Oh, no, I know how to drive. I know how to drive. I know how to do all of this. I was an assistant. I know how to do this. I know how to do this." So, fast forward with the two talkers, and everybody else was pretty quiet. I mean, mostly it was like me. I was 24. One guy, the mouth, the guy who couldn't shut up about him and his boys was probably 26, 27, and the young cat who was 21, they had a problem getting him a job. Even the guy in driver replacements was a little pissed off because they kept recruiting. They were a type of company that they recruited everybody. Okay, they recruited everybody and then try to put you in a job. Because remember, they don't get paid from their loan unless they get you a job. That's the way it worked with the one I had. They don't get paid for the loan unless they get you a job. So if they don't get you a job, they don't get paid. So they ended up in a bad situation. Again, this is back in the day in my specific loan situation because everybody had different loans. They were selling you out to everybody. So that was my specific loan situation. So they were always trying to get you a job. But this young cat, he wasn't old enough. I mean, back then in trucking, if you weren't 21, unlike today, they let you get a job at 18. But if you weren't 21, you can't get a job, And this is when trucking was starting to clean up. We were getting rid of the old guard. The whole I'm a truck driver and I drink, that world was dying. The whole I'm a truck driver and I'm taking black beauties to stay up, that was dying. So what you ended up with was an industry that was sick and tired of that old world. So as a result, you're 21 years old, they look at you as a partier. You got to remember that was during the baby boomer end right there because you had baby boomers who were, using cocaine and everything in the industry. And that world was ending. They were getting rid of that because lawsuits were building up. Companies wanted to be more professional. It was a changing world. And as a result, he was struggling. The only company that would hire him was Warner. And back then, companies weren't hiring you unless you were at least 23. I remember that specific. Some of them were 23. Some of them were 25. Some of them would not mess with you. The other part is my man had failed a drug test. Young cat had failed the drug test, which was not as huge back then that he failed the drug test because drug testing was starting to become more and more important. Like I said, the old mentality was dying, but he had some serious issues, and as a result, I think he had to retake his drug test. And it was funny because Every one of those guys, every guy, those specific guys I remembered. Oh, we had one guy who was ex-military, which always made me laugh because a lot of the ex-military guys, we had like three or four of them. We had one guy who was African. He was ex-military too, but he wasn't ex like U.S. military. I think he was some type of UN or something like that. But his wife played basketball. He and the white guy who was military, both of those dudes had driving experience. But for some reason, because it was military, or no, the African guy was in military. You know what? He was with. I don't know where I got that from. He wasn't military. He was with not. I said the UN. He was with some beach crap. He was with some beach crap. I know where I got that from. He was with some beach crap. Anyway, he like delivered Coca-Cola and Pepsi in foreign countries or some shit. Anyway, his wife and him were doing some type of thing like online business, and at the same time, his wife played basketball back when Dumars was coaching. So they had a house, as a result. But other than that, he was pretty much trying to become a diesel mechanic. And he also had some other businesses where he was bringing stuff from overseas and selling it in stores and stuff. And he had a bunch of little businesses like that. And then we had, who else did we have? Let's see, we had the African guy. We had a guy who was military, though. He had driven a truck before, and he had driven a truck. For some reason, in the U.S., it wasn't valid. He did drive in the military. I was right about that. Yeah, he drove in the military for some group. But it wasn't in his country. It was like a Caribbean, maybe it was Caribbean military. I don't know. I can't remember. He drove in the military too, though. I think he was in some country or African country that required him to be in the military. I can't remember whether he was in the military or not. I think he was though, because it was him, the white guy who was in the military, the fat kind of white guy who was our trainer. He was also military, and they all knew how to drive. I didn't understand why, if you've been in the military, apparently you can't, and which was hilarious because the little short white guy who was ex-military, he literally was a pilot. He was a pilot. you know, the only reason he wasn't becoming a pilot though for a commercial airliner, because he had just gotten out of the military, was because something about hours. You apparently to be a pilot. I'm trying to remember this shit, but apparently to be a pilot years ago, he had to get a certain amount of hours in a simulator, which is hilarious. But yeah, he had to do some type of hours. Either you had to simulate them or you had to be in a real pilot, like for an airliner or something like that. And it didn't start you out at $40,000 a year, because that was why he came, because he was getting $40,000 a year, which is odd. You always think like a pilot would make at least 40 grand, but no, he didn't. No, and I can't remember a lot about the African cat though. I don't know where I got the idea. I think he was in some type of UN shit, because he kept telling us about how he used to deliver Coca-Cola to people in a truck, but he didn't need a license for it. So now he was getting his license, and he was already a diesel mechanic. But he wanted to get his license, so just in case his wife moved around again and went to another basketball team, he would go out and buy him a truck. That way he wouldn't be stuck, you know, in a situation where he have to work for some people, like he was doing there, because he was working in a mechanic shop he didn't like. But yeah, that's about it. Those were the guys there. And so those guys was the truck I was in, which was just wonderful to be in a truck full of guys. Oh yeah, and the Arab guy who was an assistant. So yep, those were the guys in my truck when we went out to the yard to learn our pre-trip inspection. That was the next lovely part, I guess. The pre-trip inspection is one of the most important parts of the test that you have to pass for the state of Michigan, and this is where I'm going to end it. But we would go out for about 3 or 4 days. We would go out and we would look at the pre-trip inspection. We got a video on it, and then we went out and we would look at the actual parts. Now these trucks were super old, and we were in this big lot off of Michigan Avenue, surrounded by trucking companies. And these lots were these trucks were super old. They had more than 1,000,000 miles on them, and they were just rackety. You know, they were just, they were so loose. You would turn the wheel like you were running. Use one hand over the other. You turn it to the right. You have to turn it to the left. And we would do basic maneuvers. And first you'd go in the morning. You do your pre-trip. Like I said, we did that nothing but that for a day. And then once we started driving the truck, that's when one of the Arab guy was telling me, "Oh, I know how to drive a truck." So they say, "All right, you go in there first." And all the cats were starting to call him Habibi for some reason. It was like a little friction between him and some of the guys, little racial friction, yes. And they were calling him Habibi, and which was, I was just sitting there like, oh boy, here we go. Yes, can't just go to work. You got to bring in this racial shit, don't you? But anyway, they were calling him Habibi, and he jumps in the truck, starts to drive, and he does pull it up. He sets up correctly. And this is like our second day that they finally letting us get in the trucks, and he starts to back it up. And the instructor is out there, and he's a real. We had this one strict guy, and he was a typical ex-military cat, but he had been a trucker, but he injured his back, and he couldn't do a long time riding anymore because his back would start hurting. So he was getting him to back up, and he starts turning to the right, and he's starting to tell him how to do it. He's like, I know, I got this. And so he backs off, and he literally swings the truck past the cones, almost into the gate. The trainer jumps up on the truck, dives through the dives through the window, pulls the brakes, and then drags his ass out the truck. He says, "You almost hit that fence." He goes at him and goes, "Oh, that fence, it was not close. It was not." He says, "Do you see the fence right there?" And they argued for a few minutes, and he basically told him he couldn't ride until the end of the day. And that's what we spent all day doing. Everybody was screwing up, backing up. It's just funny. Backing up is the art of trucking, but the reason you screw up so much on it is because it's so different than anything you've ever done. When you back up in a car, everything is fixed in one area. Plus, you're using these old trucks, and when you make a mistake in these old trucks, you got to run the wheel all the way to the right. Then you got to go back all the way to the left because they're so loose. And once you get it to the point, it's like you turn it 3 times, and then you turn it 4 times. You start to get good at it. But that's where I'll stop and go over it. So, all right, guys, truckdriver101.com. This whole idea was stolen from Jay Canal. So I'm going to bore you with more stories of my starting in trucking.